Yeah, so the analogy is to prohibition, so alcohol prohibition. So there was this huge movement in the 1900s and 1910s in the U.S. to basically outlaw alcohol. And basically what happened was this theory developed that basically alcohol was destroying society. And there were these people who felt incredibly strongly that was the case. And there were these so-called temperance movements. And they basically were pushing for these laws. And it was purely on the argument of social improvement. If we ban alcoholism, we'll have less domestic violence, we'll have less crime, we'll have, higher, people will be able to work harder, kids, whatever, kids will be raised in better family, better households and so forth. And so there was a very strong social reform kind of thing that happened in reaction actually to a perceived basically dangerous technology, which was alcohol. And then these sort of people, a lot of them were very devout Christians at the time, which is why they became known as the Baptists. And there in particular was this woman named Carrie Nation, who was this older woman who had, I guess, been in a domestic violence, kind of relationship for a long time. And she became kind of famous as the leader of the Baptists. And she actually carried an axe. And she would show up at saloons, and she would basically go behind the bar and take the axe to all the bottles and kegs. Right. She was basically a domestic terrorist on behalf of prohibition. And so anyway, and then if you read the press accounts at the time, that's how it was painted, it was a social reform movement. And in fact, they passed a law called the Volstead Act, and it actually outlawed alcohol in the U.S. It turns out there were another group of people behind the scenes that also wanted alcohol prohibition, and they wanted alcohol to be made illegal. And they wanted the Volstead Act to be passed. And these were the bootleggers. And by bootleggers, these were literally the people, specifically in those days, criminals. And these were the people who basically were going to financially benefit if alcohol was outlawed. And the reason they were going to financially benefit is because if legal alcohol sales were banned, then people really wanted alcohol. Then obviously they would buy bootlegged alcohol. And so this massive industry developed to basically import bootlegged alcohol into the U.S. A lot of it came down from Canada, came up from Mexico, came across from Europe. And the bootleggers, for the 12 years of prohibition, the bootleggers just cleaned up. And it turned out there was plenty to drink. It turned out it was very easy to get bootleg alcohol, and the bootleggers did great. And that was actually, as it turns out, the beginning of organized crime in the U.S. was that bootstrapped the existence of what, became known as the mafia. It had sort of, formed through the 20th century. Was sort of out of that. There's a HBO show called Boardwalk Empire where they show this in vivid detail, which I highly recommend. It starts Boardwalk Empire. It's a crime. It's centered around a character who's the crime boss in New Jersey at the time, and it starts with the massive party that they threw the night that alcohol prohibition took effect. Because they were toasting, those basically they were toasting Congress for doing them such a huge favor to set up their business for success. So anyway, there's this observation economists have made. This is sort of a pattern that they call Baptists and bootleggers, which is basically any social reform movement basically has both parts. It's got basically the true believers who are this thing, whatever this thing is a moral evil and must be vanquished through new laws and regulations. And then there's always this kind of corresponding set of people, which are the bootleggers, which are basically the cynical opportunists who basically say, "Wow, this is great. We can use the laws and regulations passed by this reform movement basically to make money." And what happens, the tragedy of it is, what happens is the bootleggers don't help the Baptists as much as the bootleggers co-opt the movement, and then the laws that actually get passed are optimized for the bootleggers, not for the Baptists. Right, and then it doesn't actually work, right? And actually, in Prohibition, it didn't work. Prohibition didn't work. It didn't work during Prohibition. Didn't work after Prohibition because of the bootleggers. And so you have this thing, and then the modern form of the bootleggers, it's less often criminals. In the modern form, it's basically legitimate business people who basically want the government to protect them from competition. Specifically, they want the formation of either a monopoly or a cartel, and they want a set of laws and regulations passed that basically mean that a small number of companies are only going to be allowed to operate in that industry, in that space, and then there will be basically a regulatory structure that will prevent new competition. And this is a term called regulatory capture, and that is what is happening right now. That's the actual thing that's playing out in Washington D.C. right now, and I think we're sitting here tonight. Today it's D.C.'s in the heat of this right now. And quite honestly, it's 50-50 right now, whether or not the government's going to basically bless a cartel of a handful of companies to basically control AI for the next 30 years, or actually going to support a competitive marketplace.
So I want to actually go into they have what sound like sensible claims, and I would like to go into those in just a moment. Before that, how do you think about the risk of us getting it wrong? How do you think about the risk of the Baptists and bootleggers winning? We actually create the regulations, slow this stuff down and stop it. Why does that matter in the long run?
Yeah, because a couple reasons. So one is the Baptists aren't going to get what they want. They're at the end of the day, on the other side of this, the bootleggers are going to get what they want. So whatever the Baptists think they want, that's not going to be the result of the regulations that are passed. And I could there's tons of other examples I could give you of this. Nuclear power and banking are two other examples where this is played out very clearly. in the last few decades. So the Baptists are not going to win. It's the bootleggers that are. If it happens, it's the bootleggers that are going to win. And then what you'll have is you'll have either a monopoly or a cartel. And in this case, it'll be a cartel. It'll be 3 or 4 big companies, and they'll basically be the only companies that are allowed to do AI. And they'll be basically, it'll be this thing where the government thinks they control them through the laws and regulations, but what actually happens is those companies will basically be using the government as a sock puppet. And the reason for that is these companies will be in a position, in a lot of cases, to just simply write the laws, right, which is a big part of regulatory capture. But also, these big companies, like they have armies of lawyers, right, and they have armies of like lobbyists, and they spend huge amounts of money on politics, and they have people saturating Washington D.C. And then there's the revolving door, kind of thing where they hire a huge number of people, coming out of positions of power and authority. They cycle people back into the government. And so basically the companies end up controlling the government at the same time the government nominally ends up controlling the companies. And then, of course, the consequences of a cartel, right? Competition basically drops to, 0. Prices, skyrocket. Technological improvement stagnates. Choice, in the marketplace diminishes. And then you have what we have in every market where there's a cartel. You just have steadily escalating prices for products that are the same or getting worse. Nobody's really happy. The whole thing is corrupt. 4 of the 10 richest counties in the U.S. are suburbs of Washington, D.C. Right? And this is why. This process is why. Right? Because these companies, we have a cartel. Sitting here today in the U.S., we have a cartel of defense contractors, right? We have a cartel of banks. We have a cartel of universities. We have a cartel of insurance companies. We have a cartel of media companies. There are all these cases where this has actually happened. And you look at any one of those industries and you're like, wow, what a terrible result. Let's not do that again. And then here we are on the verge of doing it again.
So I just want to broaden it just a little bit. So I'm actually in DC right now as we speak. I talked to the number of heads of agencies, and to a person, their view is this stuff is dangerous, it's bad. We should kind of slow it down. We should understand what we're doing. I mean, it's everything that you're saying. So I actually think we're kind of almost on the losing side of it. To me, it's discouraging. In your piece, you brought up not just economic implications, but geopolitical implications. I'm wondering if you mind talking about that just a little bit. I think it's very, very relevant.
Yeah, well, look, this is the big. So the big question ultimately, I think, is China. And to be clear, just to say a couple things up front, when we say China, we don't mean literally the people of China. We mean the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese regime. And the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese regime, they have a goal, and they are not secret with their goal. They write about it, give speeches about it, talk about it. They've got their 2025 plan. Xi Jinping gives big speeches. They publish papers. It's out. It's very easy to discover. You just go search China National Strategy AI, or what they call Digital Silk Road. They're very public about it. And there's basically, with respect to AI, they essentially have a 2-stage plan. So stage 1 is to develop AI as a means of population control within China. So to basically use AI as a technology and tool for a level of Orwellian authoritarian, right, citizen surveillance and control. Within China, to a degree that, at least I would like to believe we would never tolerate, here. And then stage 2 is they want to spread that all around the world, right? They have a vision for that. They want a world order in which that is the common thing to do. And they have this very aggressive campaign to get their technology kind of saturated throughout the world. And, they had this campaign over the last 10 years to do this at the networking level for 5G networking with this company Huawei. And they've been quite successful at that. They also have this other program called Belt and Road, where they've been loaning all this money to all these countries. And the money comes with all these requirements, the strings attached. And one of the requirements it comes with is you have to buy and use Chinese technology. And so it's very clear, and again, they're very clear on this. What they're going to do is they're going to use AI internally for authoritarian control, and then they're going to roll it out so that every other country can use it like that. And then it's going to be the Chinese model for the world. And then, in the worst case scenario, right? If this, who knows, Europe, just watching Europe trying to deal with Europe is still debating whether they should bring in Chinese 5G networking equipment. There's stories in the paper today where they're still trying to figure this out. And so they, for whatever reason, they can't even get clear on that issue, right? Which is in the answer, obviously they shouldn't do that. And so, what if basically this Chinese vision and this Chinese approach to this, Chinese Communist Party approach to this takes, basically the rest of Asia, and then takes Europe, and then takes, South America, and works this way across the world. And, look, maybe America's the last country standing, with a free society and, with infrastructure that's not, authoritarian state control. And, maybe. But I think like, look, we went through Cold War 1.0, right, in the 20th century, and the reason that was so important is like the Soviets had a vision, for global control, and it was like very important to the success of the U.S. and our allies, and to the safety and freedom of the world that like the U.S. Philosophy win, and we put a lot of effort into making sure that happened, and it did. We won. The world is a lot better off for that, and it's literally repeating right now. And then what I'm finding, just as you said, you're in DC, so you and I both talked to a lot of people in DC. What I'm finding a lot of people in DC right now is they're a little schizophrenic on this, which is if they don't have to talk about China, then they get very angry about figuring out how to punish and regulate, U.S. tech, or if they, figure out a way to get like very upset about like trying to figure out how to ban AI and all this other stuff. But when you're talking about China, they basically all agree that like this is a big threat, and like the U.S. has to win this basically Cold War 2.0 that's forming up, and our vision and our way of life have to actually win. And so then they actually snap into a very different mode of operation where they're like, wow, we need to make sure that actually American tech companies actually win these battles globally, and we have to make sure that the government actually partners with these tech companies as opposed to constantly trying to fight them and punish them. And so it's this weird thing where it depends which way you approach the discussion, and look, like this gets frustrating because it's like, wow, can't you guys Can't the experts at DC figure this stuff out? But like, I guess what I say is like, look, these are new new issues. The AI part of this is a brand new issue to have to think about. These are technically very complicated topics, and then the number of people who understand both the technology in detail and the geopolitics in detail, like there aren't very many of those people running around. And like, I certainly don't think I'm an expert on geopolitics, so I can only bring half of it. And so there is a process of thinking here that basically has to happen. My hope is that process of thinking happens before, terribly ruinous mistakes are made. And that's like, I have long-term faith that we'll figure out the right thing here, but like, it would be nice if it didn't take 5 or 10 years and like cause us an enormous amount of damage and set us way back on our heels in the meantime.
Please make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment down below about what topics you would like to see covered next. Thanks for watching.